Happy Monday morning, gang. Hope you're doing great. Hope you had a great Mother's Day weekend. Got to spend some time with mom or wives who are moms, or just time with family if maybe your mom has passed like mine has. So hope you had a great time. Good to see you. Glad you are here. As I always say, it does not matter where everybody else is as long as we are here. So let me just see who's on this morning. We got BP. Good morning, BP. Got Bruce. We got Galen. We got Quinn. Good morning, Quinn. And Russell. So great job, guys, on joining us. So let's get started. I'm thinking about one that I wanted to chat about. I was thinking about, what it takes to be not average, or what I would call extraordinary. What is ordinary? Ordinary is what is most common. And then you have extraordinary. And of course, that means what is not common. And I started thinking about what it takes in real estate to be not common or to be extraordinary, and in life overall, because one of the philosophies of Everest is this, that and I had this aha well over a decade ago when I said to George, I said, oh my gosh, I said, I just realized something. And he said, what? And I said, I just realized that we don't really own a real estate brokerage. What we own is a personal development company that happens to work with real estate agents. And he said, you know what, that's right. It really is. And what I mean by that, and what George means by that, is this, that we really focus on helping people grow as people. And when we help people grow as people, then of course, they grow as real estate agents. Because however good you are as a real estate agent is only going to be possible based upon who you are as an individual, in terms of your relationship with yourself, which I believe is the most important relationship, as well as with your creator. But you are a manifestation or a product of your creator. Then, of course, the relationship that you have with anybody else on this planet. But then also your health, your mental, physical, emotional, and your spiritual health. And then, of course, your business. That all of those things are tied to who you are. And more importantly, not who you've been, or even who you are today, but who you're going to become. And so, I asked this question, well, what is it that we should focus on to allow for us to become more, to not be ordinary, to not be common, but to be extraordinary? And it reminded me of the story of John F. Kennedy when in 1962, he traveled to Texas and gave a speech at Rice University. And it was a speech that if you were present in the day and you took into account what was going on in the world with the Cold War, the United States at war with communism, and specifically the Soviet Union and the Eastern Bloc countries, there was a lot of tension, and there was an arms race, and the United States was trying to remain on top. And the Soviets and the communists in the world were trying to get on top to overthrow the United States and democracy, or a democratic republic. And it was a big deal. And it was taken very seriously. There was a lot of tension. In fact, around that time, there was the Cuban Missile Crisis, where it's believed that the world became closer than it ever had been, and has ever been since that time, closer to an all-out nuclear war. And John F. Kennedy traveled to Rice University to give a speech about the idea of putting a man on the moon within the decade. In fact, he said before 1970. It's very interesting though, gang. It's because we forget, because it's talked about so much, and you see satellites in space, you see rockets, not only from the military and the federal government, NASA going up into space, but private companies owned by people like Richard Branson or Jeff Bezos or Elon Musk, that private citizens are putting these rockets and satellites into space. And, just 50, 60 years ago, I guess, the United States was struggling to put a satellite into space. And the Soviets were like leaps and bounds ahead of the United States. And out of panic. And John F. Kennedy knew that. And there was concern that the Soviets were going to overtake us in space. And if they did that, then effectively they would win the Cold War, and it would be the end of the United States and the world as we know it in terms of freedom. And John F. Kennedy took the bold position that we were going to put a man on the moon, not just a satellite into space or a rocket into space. We were going to take a rocket with human payload, and we were going to shoot it towards the moon, land on the moon, have men walk on the moon, return them from the moon to tell the story. Now, it's pretty commonplace now. We look at it and say, well, yeah, what's the big deal? What's the big deal? We couldn't put a satellite into space, gang. And he's standing there saying, we're going to put a man on the moon within the decade. In fact, it was 1962 when he said it. And some 7 years later, of course, we all know the story. John Glenn and Buzz Aldrin and others went to the moon, and some of them walked on the moon. Very interesting. But when he gave that speech and he went back to the White House, people were in panic. People who would be in charge of making certain this happened, the people who would have to report to John F. Kennedy, the president, were panicking. They said, sir, we don't have the ability to do this. He said, well, what do you mean? Well, we don't have the technology. We don't have the things that are needed. So what he did, excuse me, gang, what he did, he said, well, gang, rather than focusing on what it is that we can't do, let's focus on what we can do. So he said, what's the first challenge? And somebody said, well, we don't have a fuel, a type of fuel that would be necessary to take a rocket of the size that would need to be, with the thrust power that it would need to have, to take the payload that we would need to put on with people and equipment, lunar rover and all the other things that are needed, and actually get it to the moon and back. He said, oh, great. So now we know what our first challenge is. He said, what's the next challenge? Somebody said, well, we don't have a rocket that's powerful enough. Okay, great. What's the next challenge? And they went through and enumerated all of the challenges. And when they got done with all the challenges, then he said, okay, gang, now what we have to do is we simply focus on the solutions to those challenges. And as a result of that, getting them to focus not on the problems or what was impossible, but redirecting their focus onto what was going to be necessary, we, of course, know what happened. That within the next 7 years, the United States developed the most sophisticated space program in the world and has maintained that since. And a man was put on the moon on July 24th, I believe it was, 24th, I think, or maybe 21st, I don't remember. Some of you may remember, but it was that third week of July in 1969, just a month or so after I was born. Great year, by the way. So I think it's an interesting story. Let me tell you another one, or just give you an example. If I said 10 times 10, of course, if we know our multiplication, right, we would have come up with the answer. The answer is what? What is 10 times 10? It's 100. If I said 5 times 5, you would give me the answer. You would say it's 25. If I gave you numbers such as, say, 1,772 times 562,777, you wouldn't be able to calculate that number in your head, in most cases, most likely, unless you were a savant, right? But you could ask me to repeat those numbers. You would write those numbers down, and what would you do if you didn't have a calculator? Because most of you say, well, I would just calculate it on my iPhone, on my calculator app. But if you didn't have a calculator, what would you do? Well, you would write down the numbers, and because you know the what? You know the formula, you would begin to calculate what those numbers products would be in multiplication, in a multiplication formula. And if you used the formula correctly, you would come up with the what? The right answer. Isn't that interesting? It wouldn't matter how large the numbers or small the numbers were, as long as you simply followed the formula, you would come up with the correct answer. So I want you to write this down. If you're taking notes, which I hope you are, write this down, because I think it's a very powerful statement, and it's a very powerful principle. It's this: with clarity, there is power. With clarity, there is power. Now, what I know is this: when John F. Kennedy stood at Rice Stadium and announced to the world that the United States was going to put a man on the moon within the decade, what he was trying to do is to create a sense of clarity, of focus. So much so that he said something that everybody believed was not possible, at least within the decade. There were many people who thought it was possible eventually, but certainly not within the decade. It might take 20, 30, 40 years, but it wasn't going to happen in the next 7 years. But what John F. Kennedy did is they got a nation, and those within the nation, NASA and others, military groups and military contractors, to focus on what it was going to take to actually make it happen. And as a result, because of that focus and dedication, they were able to achieve what was believed to be the unachievable. So I share that with you because what I would like to do is just have a conversation with the time that we have remaining about getting focused, about creating clarity. I believe that great conversations are nothing more than a series of questions. And I believe that the thinking process begins with asking questions. So if you want to be smarter, if you want to be more enlightened, if you want to get better results, then think. And the thinking process at its core, gang, is nothing more than asking great questions and then looking to find the what? The answers. That's what John F. Kennedy did. He asked great questions that led them to great answers that caused focus to get the results that they wanted, which was to put a man on the moon. So look, I know that you're not trying to put a man on the moon, so to speak, but it may seem to you at times that reaching your goal of production or income in real estate is tantamount to putting a man on the moon, right? Well, if you feel that way, then it would be important to stay engaged over the next few minutes as I give you some questions that I want you to write down and ask yourself so that you can begin the process of focus to create the mindset that you need to begin to become more, as I said in the beginning. Because if you're going to achieve anything that you've never achieved before, you're going to have to become someone you've never been before. Let me say that again. It's really important. If you're going to achieve something you've never achieved before, you're going to have to become someone you've never been before. Now, the cool thing is you can become someone you've never been before, but you're going to have the right conversation with yourself. You're going to have to ask the right questions to then create the right focus on the things that you will need to do, or more specifically, and most importantly, become in order to achieve what it is that you say that you want. So, whether we're talking about your relationships, which I believe is the first pillar, relationship with yourself and everybody else, or your health, mental, physical, emotional, or spiritual, or we're talking about your business, which I believe all three of those, which I call the three pillars, are all interconnected. They all depend upon one another. When one is suffering, the others suffer. When one is powerful, it tends to bring up the others. They're interdependent. They build each other up, or they can tear each other down. So that I just want you to think about those three categories: your relationships, your health, and then your business, as I go through and ask you these questions, because these questions will relate to any one of those categories, or maybe specifically to one of those categories. So the first question that I'm going to ask you to ponder, to come up with great answers, because gang, ordinary people, I promise you, you know this in your heart of hearts, ordinary people do not have this conversation that we're about to have, that you're going to have over the coming days and weeks and months and hopefully years as you work to progress to become the person you want to become. They don't. They are ordinary people. That's why they're ordinary people. It's extraordinary people who ask great questions, have great conversations that lead them to doing more, becoming more, and living extraordinary lives. So the first question is this. You can listen to it, and then I'll repeat it a couple of times so you can write it down. What have you learned? ... What are your truths? So what have you learned? What are your truths? Let me repeat that. What have you learned? ... What are your truths? And if you want to write it in first person, do that. So what have I learned? What are my truths? What have I learned? What are my truths? And you say, well, John, what do you mean by that? What have I learned? What are my truths? What are the things up to this point in your life, whether you're 20 something, 30 something, 40 something, 50 something, 60 something, 70 something or more? What are your truths? What have you learned? What are the principles? What are the philosophies? And what are the standards that you know in your heart that you'll have to live by? The principles, the philosophies, the standards that you will have to live by in order for you to get to the next level, whatever that next level is, and whatever category we're talking about, relationships, health, or your business. What are those principles, philosophies, and standards? What are those truths? So, for example, you're sitting down and you're saying, well, I want to do better in real estate. I'm not earning the amount of money that I want. I'm not getting the results that I want. Okay, great. What have you learned? What are the truths? What are those principles, philosophies, and standards that you know, maybe not the ones that you like, but the ones that you know that if you ignore them, you're not going to be successful. But that if you not only pay attention to them, but you actually live up to those principles, those values, and those standards, you'll achieve what it is that you want, because you'll become the person who gets those sorts of results. So what have you learned? What are the truths? And here's what I know, gang. There isn't any one of you on this call today who doesn't already know the truths, the principles, the philosophies, the standards, basically the rules of success in any arena of life. There isn't one of you that already doesn't know what those standards are. It doesn't mean that you can't get better at them. For example, let me just say this. If I said to you, what's the number one thing that you should do to get more business in real estate? I am absolutely certain that there isn't any one of you who doesn't already know that it's to prospect consistently, or to prospect more, or to just prospect if you're not doing that. Every one of you knows that. So it's not a question of whether you know it or not. It's really a question of you acknowledging that that's a truth. What have I learned? One of the things I've learned is one of the truths in real estate is if I'm going to be successful, I have to prospect. Now, it doesn't mean that you're doing it, right? The truth isn't a truth just because you're doing it. The truth is a truth regardless of what you do. That's the whole point. So if you'll recognize what the truths are and then you adhere to those truths, you're going to get great results. But if you observe the truths and you ignore them, well, you're not going to get great results. You will be ordinary. See, gang, success has rules. And when you follow the rules, you get great results. When you violate the rules, you're going to lose the game. So what have you learned? What are the truths? What are the principles, philosophies, and standards that you know, whether it's in your relationships, your health, or in your business, that you should be following, that you should be recognizing? See, because, gang, with clarity, there is power. The more clear you are, and you're focused on it on a conscious level, these are the truths. The more clear you are on those, the more likely it is that you'll adhere to the truths, and the more likely it is that you're going to get the results that you want. Remember, these questions are being asked to spark that conversation so that you can have a conversation with you about what you need to do in terms of adjusting your approach to get the results that you want. It's not rocket science, no pun intended. It's not as difficult as putting a man on the moon. Number two, the second question is this. Listen to it and then you can write it down. What are you no longer willing to accept? What are you no longer willing to accept? Whether it's in your relationships, your health, or in your business, what are you no longer willing to accept? Sit down and have a conversation with yourself and say, John, I am no longer willing to accept that. It is unacceptable. I'm not going to go another day allowing myself to act in ways that allow that condition, whatever it is in my life, to persist. It doesn't mean that I'm going to eliminate the result tomorrow, but I'm going to change my behavior now because I'm going to change the way in which I think now. I'm no longer going to accept that. It is not acceptable to me anymore. So what is it in your life that's going on that you're no longer willing to accept? Because when you ask that question and you say, okay, what am I no longer willing to accept? Well, I'm no longer willing to accept that I'm out of shape, for example, or that my relationship isn't where I want it to be, or I'm not making as much money as I want to make or need to make ends meet, or to achieve my dreams, to live the life that I want, to have the freedom to do the things that I want. So what are you no longer willing to accept? Okay, great. I say I'm no longer willing to accept I'm overweight, I'm out of shape. Great. Well, what's it going to take to change that? What do I have to change in my life? What do I have to eliminate, or what do I have to add? Well, I got to eliminate those crispy, spicy chicken sandwiches from Wendy's and those biggie fries and that large frosty shake. Yum, right? But I got to eliminate that. Maybe don't eat it every day. Maybe eat it once a week or once a month. And what do I have to add? Well, maybe I got to add some exercise since I'm not doing that. In other words, get yourself to consciously recognize what needs to change and then shift your focus to that and then engage in those activities so that over time you become the person that you want to become. What are you no longer willing to accept? Number 3, third question. What gives my life purpose? What gives my life purpose? Gang, extraordinary people are extraordinary because they are not normal. Extraordinary people are driven by a clear sense of purpose. They know why they get up every morning. And even on days when they're not excited to do what it takes, they know why they're doing it. And as a result, they are much more disciplined. It doesn't mean every day that they're excited to do it. But despite how they feel, let me repeat that, despite how they feel, they get up and do it anyway because they understand the purpose behind which they're doing it. They have something that is so important to them that they will fight through the apathy, the uncertainty, all of the resistance that life will throw at them. They'll fight through it in order to achieve ultimately what it is that they want, to achieve their purpose, to live their purpose. What I know is that most people do not have a clear sense of what their purpose is. You might say, well, John, I don't know if that's true. No, it is absolutely true. The average person does not understand what their highest purpose is. The average person exists every day just simply to survive. And if we had more time, I would add this statement and allow for a conversation, but this one's just rhetorical. Prove me wrong. The average person lives in fear and constantly just lives and behaves in ways just enough to stay ahead of the boogeyman, the bill collector, or whoever's chasing them in life, or whatever boogeyman is chasing them. They live in a constant state of fear. They're being chased by their fears rather than being pulled by their dreams and their aspirations and the love. Remember, gang, there are only 2 primary emotions that control in life. There's fear and there's love. And the average person, on a day-to-day basis, controlled by fear. The extraordinary person, the exception amongst us, they live in love. They're controlled by love. They're pulled by love. So what gives your life purpose? Extraordinary people have an answer to that question. And we know who those people are. You see them on a daily basis. The energy, enthusiasm with which they live life. And you watch their consistency, their discipline, and the results that they get. Doesn't mean they don't have bad days. Of course they do. They do. We all do. But they live life with purpose. And because of that, they have more great days than average days or bad days. And that is dramatically different than the average person. Question number 4. How will you know that you're on track? How will you know that you're on track? Do you know if you're on track? See, it's difficult to know that you're on track if you don't really know what your life is about and what you want and when you want it. See, most people will say, well, someday I'll, and then fill in the blank. Someday I'll have a mansion. Someday I'll take my family to Europe. Someday I'll be in great shape. Someday I'll be a millionaire. Someday I'll close on 50 transactions in real estate or 24, whatever. Someday I'll fill in the blank. Well, I can tell you, I've looked on the map and I can't find someday I'll. It's not there. There is no I'll named someday. It's not there. Okay, how will you know you're on track? The only way you're going to know you're on track is to identify what it is that you want. And then say to myself, well, what will I have to do in order to get that? And then pay attention. Am I doing those things? Track your activities. How will you know you're on track? Sit down and have a conversation with yourself. What do I want? When do I want it? And what am I going to have to do to get it? And put together a plan. How will I know I'm on track? You've got to be clear about where you're going, what you have to do, and what the deadline date is. Successful people know what they want, they know what it's going to take to get it, and they have a deadline to achieve that. It doesn't mean that every time you get it. Fortunately, John F. Kennedy, when he identified what we wanted, what it was going to take, and what the deadline was, we achieved it. He achieved it. They achieved it. That is a formula for success. Okay, before we move on to question number 5, any thoughts, any questions? We'll get through these others pretty quickly. Any thoughts? Any observations? Any amens, high fives? Couple high fives. No? You're all mute. You're all mutes. BP, give me a thumbs up or something. Let me know you can hear me. Come on, gang. There we go. There we go, gang. Thank you. I just want to make certain I'm not alone. It says you're there, but I don't know that you are. Okay, cool. Question number 5, write this one down. What's important about money to me? What is important about money to me? Thank you, Lillian. It's good to not be alone. What's important about money to me? Write that question down. What is important to money about me? I'll just make one observation on this and we'll move on. Most people have a poor relationship with money. They have a poor person's mentality when it comes to money. They have a poor man's relationship or poor woman's relationship to money. See, for most people, money is about getting by. It's enough money to get gas. It's enough money to pay the house payment. It's enough money to pay the car payment. It's enough money for incidental expenses. It's enough money to get the groceries. Not all the groceries we want, maybe not the filet mignon, but we'll get the hamburger because we need some protein. We like beef, but we can't get that filet mignon. For most people, that's the relationship with money. And then there are those who are successful, who are extraordinary. See, for them, money isn't about just getting by. It's not just about survival. It's about thriving. It's about living their dreams. It's about this one word, freedom. It's freedom. So I asked that question, what's important to you about money? Is money just a way for you to just get by? Does money frustrate you? Does money make you nervous? Does it give you anxiety? See, that's a relationship of a poor person's mindset. See, somebody who's extraordinary and successful, their mindset is that money's abundant, that it's everywhere. They just simply have to look for it. There's a money tree out there and there's a lot of low-hanging fruit on it. Of course, metaphorically. But it's no coincidence that people who have a lot of money have a lot of money. It's because they have a great relationship with money. You can say, well, John, they have a great relationship with money because they have a lot of money. They didn't start out that way. I didn't start out that way having a lot of money. I didn't grow up relatively poor, grew up in trailers, been broke a couple of times. So, what's your relationship with money? See, for me, money's not about getting by. For me, money is freedom to have the opportunity to do what I want, when I want, with the people I want to, as often as I want to. Question number 6. What's important about my health? What's important about my health? Do you know what's important about your health? Not why is great health important, but what's important about it to you? What do you want to look like? What do you want to feel like mentally, physically, emotionally? What's important to you? What would you like to be doing in your life on a daily basis? Would you like to have the stamina to be on your feet all day, prospecting, talking to people, high energy, enthusiastic, causing people to look at you and say, man, I love being around him, or I love being around her, right? And getting home at the end of the day and not being exhausted and having the ability to go to the gym, exercise, work out, feel great about yourself, and then finally get home and say, man, it's been a long day, productive, but I'm ready to get some sleep. Get some sleep, a good 6 to 8 hours, wake up in the morning feeling refreshed, saying, I am so excited to do it again. What is important to you about your health? What do you want it to look like? See, if you answer that question, then you can begin the process of saying, well, what do I have to do in order to get to that level? Question number 7, define the type of relationships you want and who you want to be in those relationships with. So if it's an intimate relationship, well, who do I want that relationship to be with? Or if you're in one, what do I want that relationship to look like? Is there room for improvement? For some of you, you might say, no, I have an amazing relationship, intimate relationship. For some of you, you're going to say, man, there is definitely room for improvement. Or some of you are going to say, I'm not in one. I'd really like to be in one. So define the type of relationship that you want and who that person is. And here, let me follow up with this. This is the most important part. Because we always look at others, but in relationships, I can tell you after having been in many and have learned a lot in terms of where I made my mistakes that contributed to the relationship not working, who I have to become in order to be in that sort of relationship. It's the most critical part. So what sort of relationship do I want to be in? What does that person look like? But who do I have to become in order to be in that relationship with that type of a person? Who do I have to become? Powerful, powerful question. One that will cause you to have a conversation with yourself that most people don't want to have, because they realize that in order to be in that sort of relationship, to have that sort of person, they have to change significantly. They have to become a different person. They have to behave differently. They have to communicate differently. They have to take responsibility for what it is that they're doing in any relationship that's causing the challenges. Instead of pointing the finger and blame, well, I wouldn't do this if they wouldn't do that. Well, how about you just focus on yourself and who you have to become that maybe permits them to change their behavior? And then finally, this question. How will you know that your life was fulfilling? How will you know that your life was fulfilling? I left with this one last because I think that this one is probably the most powerful. Imagine being on your deathbed or being on your death trail. You got your hiking boots on, you're 99 years old. Tomorrow's your birthday, and you're hiking along. And you have a heart attack and you fall to the ground. And there you are looking up at that beautiful blue sky and that beautiful yellow sun, surrounded by those beautiful trees and the birds and the water. And it's now this moment for you where your life is flashing before your eyes. And you reflect on that life, everything that happened. How will you know that your life was fulfilling? See, most people don't take the time getting today, now, in their 20s, their 30s, their 40s, their 50s, their 60s, to ask, how will I know at the end of my days that my life was fulfilling? And unfortunately, for many people, they end up living this life and passing this life without having lived the life that they wanted to or that they were capable of. The greatest repository of success unrealized, it's called potential, is graveyards. Let me say that again. The greatest repository of success unrealized is called potential, and it's found in graveyard. Well, gang, not you, not us. Why? Because we ask great questions of ourselves and we come up with great answers to focus on so that we can begin to behave in ways that allow us to become the person we need to, so that in order to answer that question, how will I know my life was fulfilling? And on that day, when we breathe our last breath, we know that it was fulfilling because we lived each and every day focused on who we needed to become to live the life that we wanted to. Gang, do not underestimate the importance of this. Most people will not have these conversations. In fact, what I have found that most people I've talked to, the thousands and thousands of people that I've talked to, whether in coaching sessions or in front of a room, the vast majority, fewer than 10% of people will never focus on this. And over 90% of people will never do this, even though they know that they should, even though we've had this conversation, they won't. Well, I hope and I trust that you will be the exception, that you'll be that extraordinary person who will do what it takes to focus on what it will take for you to become who you want to become so that you can say, I live a full life, that I am grateful, I am happy because I achieved my potential and I left nothing inside of me, that I gave it my all. And gang, what I know about each and every one of you is this, that whatever you want to achieve, you can achieve it. But you're going to have to follow the rules of success. You're going to have to pay attention to them. You're going to have to recognize the principles, the philosophies, and the standards. In other words, the truths. And if you will, like the good book says, if you will recognize the truth and you will live by the truth, it shall set you free. All right. I've enjoyed this conversation. Hope you have. If you have any questions, I'll remain here for a minute or two. If not, thank you. Great job on starting your week with the coaching call. Remember, this week we have the Everest Summit. It's the Everest Coaching Summit. It's a special one. It's not a normal one. It'll start at 9 a.m. and go until 4 o'clock. You don't have to be there for the whole thing. We are serving lunch. It is being done to raise monies for a charitable organization called the American Dream Grant. We ask for a donation, but you do not have to donate. We just simply want your butts in the chairs so that we can talk about prospecting, objection handling, presenting, getting more listings, and building and protecting a powerful mindset so that you can, gang, live the life that you want. Remember, Thursday, May 18th at the Larry H. Miller Conference Center in Sandy, just off of 90th South. It's where we always have our summits. If you have any questions, reach out to me or reach out to your manager. Otherwise, gang, have a great week, and we will see you there.